Security seems to be high in demand in the new areas, with high walls, gated communities, 24-hour CCTV, large boulders stopping car access and barbed wire. What is the reasoning behind the large amount of security? Do the occupants of the upper class housing feel threatened by their neighbours?
It felt natural to turn left onto Clarence Road towards the Millennium Centre, which presented a very subconscious pull factor of the more developed area to the pushing away factors of degradation within the heart of Butetown's residential ward. To me, that felt the clear difference, depicted the edge of Butetown and the beginning of Cardiff Bay. This was further emphasised not only through the physical boundaries and fence line that divided the pavement and the road, but a change in scenery, more upmarket offices compared to dilapidated residential housing, and upmarket restaurants and tourist facilities on the western approach to the bay. Either side of Clarence Road are recreational areas that seemed to soften the idea of a definitive boundary that I initially felt by the road and the difference in the type of buildings. I found it quite ironic to see a fenced-off dilapidated building on the rapidly developing side of Clarence Road. For me, it symbolised the run-down ward of Butetown, situated within the heart and soul of development and gentrification, yet ignored and put to the side to make way for a modern transition of the area. Ultimately, this created clear divisions and boundaries within Butetown itself, defining the boundary of the inner ward to be parallel with the road. Towards the end of Clarence Street, it was clear that there was a spread of modernisation of buildings, sprawling out from Cardiff Bay to the surrounding streets, creating clear-cut divisions of new and old, historic and modernistic, a contrast in their own right, and here, a sense of division between the two boundaries as well. Bishwapra Sanyal illustrates in Breaking the Boundaries that space provides the container or the stage with its barriers, and limitations for the interaction and interplay of forces, which ultimately create and continually change spatial structures. To me, this seems very relevant for explaining how there are different and changing boundaries within Butetown. The continual spatial changes that occur over time can create a divide between modern development and an area that is left in the past.
Leading south of Clarence Road, we have now entered the social hub of Cardiff Bay, an area that always has hustle and bustle, full of tourists and with the increased footfall due to the World Rally being based at the Bay. This area is an area which enjoys a huge income, and graffiti is used here as an advertisement and not a plea, acting as the edge of a boundary in itself. The example shown in the picture is a piece of art inviting people to come to a bar, a huge contrast to the graffiti in the estate, which is what was showing people of the inhabitants' suffering and the struggle to live everyday life, along with their desire to achieve better than their current situation. Mainstream nationwide restaurants and shops are located in the Bay, compared to that of the multi-ethnic, privately owned, struggling takeaways and locally owned shops in the council estate. The cost of food, drinks and social activities down the Bay have acted as a boundary in itself, as they prevent the people that live in the government-owned housing to utilise the facilities, opportunities and activities. A current example being the welcoming of the World Rally to the Cardiff Bay. Food and drink prices have increased, preventing some neighbouring communities to visit the event, creating an even greater, although somewhat temporary, boundary. The marine history of the Bay now provides an extra tourist attraction to the area, but the people who use these facilities are not the people who create this legacy. I feel that the presence of the Welsh Government's home is somewhat ironic due to the fact that people they claim to protect and help improve their lives live in deprivation within a couple of 100 metres. Development in the Butetown estate is slow and cheap, whereas the Welsh Government have moved into the Senedd, costing £69.6 million.
Lloyd George Avenue acts as a clear physical boundary of Butetown, running adjacent to the train line that connects Cardiff Bay and Cardiff city centre together. Whilst drifting north along this road towards the city, we asked 5 passers-by where they were heading and where they came from. One replied, "I've just finished work at ING Direct on the edge of town, and now heading home, which is down at Cardiff Bay." This seemed to highlight the fact that a boundary such as Lloyd George Avenue acted as a thoroughfare between the bay and the city, taking no notice of Butetown which separated them, with vegetation acting as camouflage, trying to hide Butetown from the rest of the world. This boundary was further emphasised by a sign of a fish, pointing towards the city and the bay, subtly portraying the history of the fishermen who inhabited the area, yet giving no direction to their roots, Butetown. Ironically, further up Lloyd George Avenue, there was a sign pointing towards Butetown, Cardiff Bay and the city centre. Yet Butetown's sign was in the poorest condition, and for me this symbolised Butetown to be inferior and acted as a boundary in itself. The wire mesh dividing the train line from Butetown gave a real sense of imprisonment that I found very odd, that such clear divisions occurred of an area that brought such prosperity in the past, and now seems to be very deliberately closed off from the rest of society to appreciate. The only access to Butetown from Lloyd George Avenue was via an underpass, literally feeling like the starting and finishing point of Butetown. I found it very revealing that such subtle architectural features had the ability to give such impacting visual and kinesthetic boundaries. The stepping down into the underpass to access Butetown, and all you see is the sense of hierarchy of the people who live in the modern and expensive housing opposite Lloyd George Avenue. Back onto Bute Street, you can see a church and a Greek Orthodox church on the left-hand side, heading towards the city, depicting the religious diversity that Butetown embodies, separating it from many other areas. In the distance, the modern high-rise buildings of John Lewis and the Radisson Hotel, acting like a brick wall, less vegetation, busier atmosphere, and modern buildings that make it easy to draw a line of where the northern boundary of Butetown actually lies. We could also draw upon the boundaries of Butetown from what we heard, highlighting the significant differences of Cardiff Bay, Butetown, and the city centre.
Yeah, it is. When there was stuff on the freeway, getting up there.
This highlights the disparity of the neighbouring areas. And in relation to our initial question, there are very distinct physical and psychological boundaries which define the edges of Butetown estate. And over the past 2 centuries, it feels like modernistic development is encroaching into the historic roots of Butetown and the cohesion within it. Perhaps it is trying to break it up, but the dissimilarities between the adjacent districts just strengthen the idea of separation.